If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucs in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
It's that time of the year where not really sure what day it is, coming off of a Christmas break, a New Year's break, but I do know the calendar has flipped to 2025, which means baseball is almost upon us. Not a whole lot going on as far as Pirates news is concerned, but myself and Scott here are here to talk some Buccos. Scott, how you doing, brother?
I'm good. It's that time of year where people like to say, New Year, new me. And here's hoping the Pittsburgh Pirates can turn over a new leaf and maybe sign a free agent or two before pitchers and catchers report, and we look like we have an incomplete team.
Yeah, I mean, for right now, I mean, everybody keeps on talking about what we've been talking about as well as, the holes that exist, the definite needs that exist within the bullpen, obviously, and then, a corner outfielder. I mean, the one thing that I know that we've even talked about before is that, I mean, kind of people have almost like put Jack Sawinski's career to rest. I do believe that the Pirates, I mean, especially with a new hitting coach, may give him. I mean, obviously, I believe he's going to get another look at the majors. I don't know if it's going to be to start the season, but I definitely still see him, kind of in their plans. But that also means, I mean, at some point in time, you're going to have to decide: is Jack just a platoon bat? Can he hit left-handers? I mean, Ono Cruz was able to make those adjustments toward the end of last year. And Jack is not an older player, has shown some success. I mean, I was maybe mistaken about them not, considering, Brian De La Cruz's 20 home runs, because obviously making the decision to move on from him. I mean, but Jack Sawinski, in a year where he struggled a ton, hit almost 20 home runs, and then just 2 years ago hit 26 home runs, was over a two-war player. And if you're getting that out of a platoon, I mean, there's not a whole lot more you can ask for. I believe his kind of step back had a lot to do why the team didn't take a step forward last year. That and, a David Bednar, different players like that. But, I mean, even with Jack Sawinski, you would think that, one of the main places and where they don't have a ton of that depth would be in the outfield.
Yeah. Swinsky does need to be a part of the future. I mean, you've seen that he can do it at the major league level, and I don't know what exactly caused the strikeout bug to bite him so hard. But yeah, you might as well platoon him if things don't go well right out of the gate as we explore the options. Because I mean, when he was facing left-handers, he might as well have not even played. That might as well just been an empty spot in the lineup because he struggled so mightily. And that's the thing with Jack Sawinski, the highs are so high. That is one of my favorite recent memories for the Pirates. My wife and I took our kids to the Father's Day game where Jack Sawinski hit the 3 home runs, including the walk-off. And it was just such a special day, a special game. It was a moment that I'll forever remember. And I got a Tops Now card, one for myself and each of my kids. So Jack Sawinski is going to have a special place in my heart for a long time. And I'm really hoping that he can pull things out, because even if the highs don't get as high, but the lows don't get as low, if he can kind of meet in the middle a little bit and just be a little more consistent, or you have him as half of a platoon with Henry Davis, maybe. These are some guys that really do need to step up, and I think that they're guys that a lot of fans have forgotten about.
Yeah, and I mean with Jack Sawinski, and not to stick on him for too long, but just basically, I mean in 2022 when he was bouncing up and down, had a 97 WRC plus, took that step forward and had the 112 WRC plus in 2023, and then just kind of completely fell off the map. If it's something that's with like a swing adjustment and approach the plate, I mean, I would think that, they always talk about the major leagues, punching back. We thought he had maybe made it through that. 372 plate appearances in 2022, 534 plate appearances in 2023. So I feel like it seems like the league would have had time to adjust to him to a degree. And we always look at, the batting average on balls in play at times. And, last year there was maybe just even, I mean, there was a lot of strikeouts, but a 225 batting average on balls in play where he had been at 290 the year before, the average for the league usually being like right around 300. It wouldn't have, solved all of his problems. But yeah, I mean, and it wasn't even like he went down to AAA and knocked the cover off the ball. So, I mean, just kind of needs to have a reset year, which is unfortunate because, as you're saying, as I'm saying, is I think it's a player, whether or not fans, want him to be a part of it or not. I still see it as the team wanting him to be a part of it because, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we talk about during the offseason, Scott, is, what the team could or kind of should do. And we will get into that. I mean, but in the end, I think towards the end of last episode, I was just kind of talking about, okay, well, this is what I feel like they're trying to do just because, I mean, in the end, Charrington is the one, pulling the strings along with, Steve Sanders, Kevin Graves, the other assistant GMs, the scouts, and whoever it may be. So ultimately it's going to be, kind of up to them to make these types of decisions. So, yeah, I mean, I still see Jack as a piece of this. I mean, that's why, when I keep talking about this, and I mean, we're going to talk about some free agents here, is that I usually lean towards looking at, the right-handed options for the outfield. I know that, the Pirates struggled a lot more with hitting right-handers as opposed to left-handers last year. That's why, a Spencer Horwitz move kind of makes a little bit of sense in that aspect. A guy that, hits from the side that, you were having those struggles with, where Jack would have normally filled on that and mashed that right-handed pitching. But that's kind of where my mind goes, and that's why I lean that way. But before we got on here and earlier today, we were kind of talking about the fact that, you may have some names that, I mean, maybe not exactly targeting, but just some options, because we really haven't discussed a lot of the free agents out there. And just to give some people, our listeners, an idea of, the caliber of player. I mean, obviously, we weren't going to be in on Soto. We're not going to be on certain players, but I mean, I know that Jason Mackey last offseason used that phrase of shopping in a different aisle, but we've basically said that you have to find a player with a potential to either have a rebound season, the best season of his career, or maybe a breakout season, because that could be what's going to take us over the top. And of the list of players that I looked at least, and even the ones that other people wanted signed, like say a Max Kepler had not a great season at all last year and was injured off and on. You would hope that he would be able to come back, and that's kind of what the team signing him is banking on. So it's almost like the Pirates would be banking on something similar.
Yeah, the names that I looked at, I tried to stay realistic with the kind of players that the Pirates would look at. I'm not going to bring up a Pete Alonso or somebody like that, which is obviously not going to be in the aisle that they're shopping this or any season. But the first name that I have on my list when I was looking at potential solutions for first base, if they decide to do a platoon with Horwitz, A bounce back candidate that I came up with was JD Davis. Last year he spent time with the A's and the Yankees, and at the end of the season got signed to a minor league deal with the Orioles. So I didn't see any time. But he hit 218, on base 293, 338 slugging for a 631 OPS, but only 4 home runs. But in 2023, with San Francisco, he was a .9 B-WAR player, 18 home runs, 23 doubles, a 738 OPS. Somebody like that they could bank on from the right-handed side to be a complement to Horowitz, and could sign to one of those show me deals that we talk about. We've talked about in the past. I think that was the first name that I came up with.
Yeah, and that's not a bad player, and he has, shown some flexibility to play at other positions. I know that, he's getting up there in age, so, first base would be more of his natural position. And that's not, my first thought, but once again, like I kind of go into Ben Cherington's head because a lot of the times, they're looking for those guys with that position flexibility, and especially since you do already have another first baseman on the roster, it's not like you're going to kind of go out there to sign Rowdy Tellez. But even with Tellez, they were using kind of Connor Joe as like a little bit of that platoon player, a player to give him rest, different things like that, and would be a veteran bat. And like you said, you're only 1 year removed from having a fairly decent season, and that's the kind of players, like I said, that we are more than looking at. A name that I've seen out there for a different position, I've been seeing a Jurickson Profar. I mean, Jurickson Profar pretty much broke out a little bit a couple years ago, and then really had his full breakout season after having a fairly middling career. And you're talking about a guy in JD Davis who was, kind of sought after, after his time in New York, and then especially, after playing in San Francisco in 2023. I think he was a guy that was mentioned on those, that roster, and it wouldn't be that he would be in a very high pressure situation. I believe that Horowitz is going to get, more than, his fair share of a run. But then also he's a guy in JD Davis that, we did sign Andrew McCutchen, but if there would be a McCutchen injury, Davis is a guy with some potential, with some power that could, also slide into the DH position. Like I said, it's not like the sexiest of pickups, Scott. I mean, I think we both know that, but it's a guy that could potentially, fill a need because you don't have Connor Joe on that roster anymore. And if you are going to platoon, I mean, you're looking at, Billy Cook, an unproven player, somebody who hasn't done it in the major leagues. You're looking at IKF, Jared Triola. I mean, we've talked about all those options before. For me, the first guy, and I've talked about this guy with you before, if I would be looking on the free agent market, and it's not even saying that I am, planting my flag for this guy whatsoever. But a guy, I just keep looking at his numbers, and I keep looking, and I just happen to have him on my fantasy team, baseball fantasy team, for a couple of years, and that's Austin Hayes. Austin Hayes last year had pretty much his worst season in 3 years. Prior to that, he always had an OPS up above 700. It wasn't like he was, the greatest hitter in the world. Showed some power, hit over 20 home runs 1 year. Last year, when he was with Baltimore, dealt with some soft tissue injuries, but then he was traded for by the Phillies, and he came down with a kidney infection, which was possibly the reason for his back issue that was, haunting him earlier on the season. I would hope that would be something that had cleared up, because, I mean, you look at his defensive numbers as well, and he's a guy that always provided positive, defensive runs saved, was always a good, player. He mostly played in left field. Everyone knows it's my goal to move Brian Reynolds to right field if he's not going to go to first base. So for me, Austin Hayes would be kind of like that bounce back guy. He's not yet 30. There are some guys, we see have breakout seasons later on. But even if he wouldn't have a breakout season, last week I talked about getting a professional hitter in a lineup, somebody who's not going to hurt you. Obviously, you're taking a risk because he's coming off of not so great of a season, but that would be the same thing with a Kepler, Conforto a couple years ago, and he's performed fairly well. He hasn't been the greatest player, but those are some of the names I've heard that people wanted, and everybody just kind of goes Austin Hayes. Ooh, well, Austin Hayes, other than last year, was the starting left fielder for an up and coming Baltimore Orioles team, and kind of was maybe going to get pushed off the roster to begin with all of the young players they have coming up. But for me, Austin Hayes would be one of those guys that would be for probably a 1 year prove it deal. And I'm not even going to estimate how much it would be because obviously these numbers have been a little bit inflated this year. My God, Carlos Santana, who had a great season last year, but got 1 year, $12 million. It's not something I really saw. I saw him maybe pushing 8 at the most with that. So, but Austin Hayes would be a guy. And that's where it kind of falls into that right-handed bat that may fall, with Jack Sawinski into a platoon, maybe give Brian Reynolds some rest or when he moves to first base or DH, and a guy that, has usually played good baseball on the offensive defensive side outside of last year. But I feel like that's the caliber of player that we're kind of looking at this point in time.
Yeah, and when you talked about his defense, that's not exactly a small left field at Camden Yards. So he would be attuned to playing that kind of larger outfield position that PNC Park has, especially since they moved the fences back. But yeah, I think also strikeout rates for Austin Hayes, because he's one of the names that I came up with too. 23% K rate last year, 25% the year before. But in 2023, 16 home runs. So yeah, he could give you a little bit of pop, and I agree with that. I think that especially the way you maneuver him and provide some of that flexibility when Reynolds moves or if Reynolds moves. Another name that I came up with, and again at the first base position, Ty France. I think that that provides another right-handed bat with some positional flexibility on both corners in the infield going into his age 30 season. Last year, playing with the Mariners and the Reds, he was a minus .6 WAR player, but bounce back candidate because that's exactly what Charrington's going to be looking for. We're not going to see any blockbuster deals, but in 2023, 12 home runs, a 703 OPS, 101 OPS plus in 23. It's a guy that again can maybe you catch him on the bounce back. That compliment to Horwitz. I don't think it's going to be a huge deal. I don't think he's going to make a ton of money. Probably a little bit more than Rowdy made last year. But again, provides some opportunity. Maybe you catch lightning in a bottle because that's what we've talked about week after week after week is that just catching those guys. And now that Trey Cabbage is gone, who we thought could be that guy that catches fire, or that kind of guy. You got to hit on one of these bounce back candidates to provide. And hey, they signed Derek Hall to a minor league deal. Any of these guys could just be that backup option. That hey, if it doesn't work, you don't sign him for a ton of money. You trade him away, or you DFA him. And in Major League Baseball, what is $5-6 million to any team, even the Pirates.
Yeah, and I actually don't mind France. And looking at only in 2022 he was hitting almost 20 bombs or right around 20 bombs, and you are definitely looking for that type of offense. And like I said, we're looking for pieces here, to kind of fill out the rest of the team. The one name that I looked into like a decent amount, and I feel like that if somebody plays well against the Pirates, then they want him more. I know that Randall Grichuk out in Arizona is somebody that we've looked at, and I know that other people have looked at. But the other thing that I don't think people have looked at is the amount of games that he has actually, kind of played in recent years. I mean, he's not a guy who's going to play full time. Last year, it played 61 games, so he's coming off of not such a great season. But if you look back, even in maybe like a little bit of an, I wouldn't say an off year, because he was playing for the Los Angeles Angels, and honestly, like a lot of Pirates fans probably aren't watching very many Angels games. Had 16 home runs, had an OPS at 780. He's more of kind of like a right field guy, so that really there's not, I don't feel that option there, to move Reynolds over. But I mean, he was a guy that I had definitely looked at, but somebody who I think that you could possibly get a little bit cheaper. And I know that there have been some people who have poo-pooed this name from the very beginning, and that's Ramon Laureano. I feel like he is a guy that kind of fits right into what the Pirates would be looking for in an absolute bounce back candidate. And for him, it kind of looks even worse because he hasn't played 100 games since 2019. But if you're asking him, I'm looking for a platoon option. That's kind of what you're looking for him to be. Had 309 plate appearances last year. OPS sat at 748, 11 home runs. So for me, like, you're almost looking, I mean, he's 30 years old. I'm not really looking for a breakout, but in this one, Liriano, I think he might be a little bit of the cheaper option to Grichuk, but may, I don't know, provide a little bit more of that platoon. And it's not because like, I'm like, okay, Jack Swinski's going to come back and he's going to do whatever, but I just think that that's what they think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you want to be really pessimistic and, glass half empty, a name that came up that entered my brain as somebody that is thinking, oh, well, who are they actually going to sign? Maybe somebody like a Dylan Carlson, who had a rough year last year with a minus 1.2 WAR, 3 home runs, only a 563 OPS. But I mean, in 2021, finished third in Rookie of the Year with a 3.1 WAR, 18 home runs, 780 OPS. We've seen guys, especially as Pirates fans, we've seen guys have amazing rookie years, and then kind of fall off a cliff. But if they're going to put a lot of eggs in the Matt Haig basket, and whether he can help Horowitz and Sawinski and even O'Neal Cruz continue to grow against lefties, Carlson being a switch hitter and playing some outfield last year, spent some time with St. Louis, of course, but then went to Tampa Bay at the end of the year. That's somebody that seems like a real, maybe not a sexy pick or any kind of, but somebody that could be like a lottery ticket, somebody that could be some AAA depth.
Yeah, and the other thing that like we're kind of like we were talking about beforehand, because you just mentioned it right there, and it's just kind of set off the light bulb in my head is like that depth that we have at AAA, like the stuff that people are mentioning, like that there's a lot of just holes that we don't have that offense in AAA. Well, that's because I feel like that people are kind of already counting on a Nick York and a Billy Cook on the Major League roster. Yes, they had their cups of coffee. I mean, but if the Pirates do make a couple of acquisitions here, they are guys that could easily find themselves on the outside looking in. And yes, I mean, I think they're going to contribute, but I also don't think it would be, a bad thing if they ended up going back down to AAA to kind of fill in for that depth. I mean, Nick York is especially, on the young age there. I know Billy Cook's a little bit older, but in the end, I mean, if you look at Cherington, he kind of in the beginning of the rebuild, he kind of backfilled the lower levels, and he backfilled the lower levels with a lot of high ceiling guys like a Leover Pagero, a guy that if he did reach his full potential, I mean, Leover Pagero, it was like the sky was the limit, but unfortunately, with a lot of those guys, the floor is a lot, lower than we can imagine. And now, towards the end, of last season, I feel like the Charrington made some very, you know, slick moves or some very strategic moves to be able to recognize that, the only next best hitter you have is Tamar Johnson, who got a little bit of time at Altoona. You have, Sammy Ciani, who did play well in the Arizona Fall League, but for the most part, you know, didn't really take off too much in Altoona. And then you don't have a lot at AAA. Well, he filled that AAA with, Cook and York. So if you have Cook and York, to me, if they came up through our system and they were sitting at AAA and they had the seasons that they had last year in AAA, I feel like Pirates fans would be a little bit more excited. But now that I think that people are putting them onto, the major league roster and thinking that we're going to have to count on them, or, didn't see that much of them last year, aside from, their cups of coffee in the major leagues, don't know much about, their track record throughout the minors. I think are maybe being overlooked in that depth a little bit. So for me, yeah, I mean, we obviously are going to have to go out and get some of these guys, but I do believe that you're also looking for guys that may be able to be replaced a little bit easier in some ways because you can't go out and get the huge names. You're looking for guys that, hopefully York or Cook would eventually be able to push out of the way. Like I said, still not forgetting Sawinski. So, I mean, that's the weird thing here is that it's that, AAA is barren. Well, I don't think AAA is barren because I think some of these guys that we're looking at counting on in the major league roster, because we don't have a full 40 man right now, there haven't been a lot of moves made that, it's gonna look barren down there, but I just don't think it's as bad as everybody, or I should say most people, are looking at it as.
Yeah, I think that that's just a psychological thing for a lot of fans, because Cook and York were, you know, they were good prospects in the respective organizations that they came from, but not everybody is looking at top 100 lists and things like that. And then we were so focused on the Pirates buying at the trade deadline and making that playoff push that these more calculated strategic moves to backfill the system and get guys that are on the cusp of making the major league roster, those moves were overlooked. And, almost these smart baseball trades, because I mean, moving Quinn Priester for Nick York, I feel like is a fantastic deal. And I think that there's a lot of potential there with York, and I look forward to seeing more from him. But yeah, when you bring in a prospect that was on somebody else's list, and then you just see him for a couple of weeks at the end of the season, there's really not enough for your regular fan, your everyday fan, to really sink their teeth into. So I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody like him start at AAA and be that AAA piece that you were talking about, and then put up some numbers and make his way to the major leagues.
Yeah, because we just, as Pirates fans, obviously we want guys to contribute. We want guys to help, make that. We're talking about that push and get towards a playoff run, hopefully at some point here in the near future. But I mean, like we're saying, we're hoping that the Charrington has something, kind of cooked up for us here early on. He did say, that's the other part is like, I mean, he did say like maybe we'll get something moving after the holidays. He said that at the winter meetings, and people kind of got a little bit frustrated with him. Obviously, made the trade during that, and has since signed McCutcheon, something that we talked about last week that was, going to be a foregone conclusion. I mean, but once again, when Cherington says something, he's kind of like honest about it. Is like he doesn't see there's going to be much movement, and I mean, realistically, has there been a ton of movement since the winter meetings as far as free agent signings? Even like kind of across the board.
Right. Right. Yeah. You know, I'm sure there's talks and groundwork laid, but these guys are people too, and they want to spend time with their families, and maybe there's not a big rush, and just because something hasn't been announced doesn't mean that they're not right there, near the goal line on it and making that final push. They're going to have to make some moves, and things are going to have to get going because we're maybe 6 weeks away from pitchers and catchers reporting. So yeah, they're running out of time.
Definitely running out of time. Did you have any other names on there, Scott? I had one more, and I think that people it's one that I think that people will be like throwing stuff at the radio while they're listening to. Do you have anybody else before?
Yeah, I looked at some bullpen. One that I'll just throw out there quickly. It's Jalen Beeks. I think that maybe they liked enough from his extension and release point to maybe give him a shot. But if we were looking at like the Aroldis Chapman bigger name in the bullpen to kind of go after for a lefty, Andrew Chafin was one that kind of maybe they'd spend a little bit of money on. But then, the Yankees have been showing interest in him, so that's going to probably drive the price up. Split time with Detroit and Texas, 4-3 record, 3.51 ERA, one save over 56 and a third innings. The more advanced numbers, just like you'd expect, he's got a killer mustache, but also a 3.54 fielding independent pitching and a 1.473 whip. So anything in the ones with whip, you like to see. But that could be somebody that if you're looking for a more established name to get picked up, that's one that stuck out for me.
Well, I'm going to let them throw stuff at you for Jalen Beeks because I know that they will. But no, I'm just kidding, man. I think on the relief pitching side of things, I think they might go test the Ryan Baraki waters again if he is healthier again, just because it's a guy that they had success with before. And I don't disagree with the Beeks thing, just because if you trade a player to acquire somebody, there it must have been something that you had liked within it. Obviously, at the time having a good record and hoping that he could get you into the postseason or help you guys make that push. Unfortunately, that's kind of not what happened. But I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with that, like, whatsoever. As a guy, just to kind of give him, I don't know, and with him sometimes towards the end, you don't know if that's even going to be on like a realistic major league deal. It could be like on a split deal or a minor league contract, with one of those invitations to spring training. The guy because I looked at a lot of outfielders. The bullpen I know is, a ton of help. But I looked at Mark Canha is who I looked at. And he played for Milwaukee in 2023. Had an OPS sitting at like 755. Always had a WAR over 1, usually over 2 in the years before that with the Mets, with Oakland. With San Francisco last year, obviously did not have that success. Saw his OPS go down below 700 to 690. Only had 7 home runs. But in the previous year, 17 home runs, 13 home runs, 11 home runs. Topped out a long time ago at 26. But like I said, I'm looking for a platoon guy. That's kind of what was on my mind when we mentioned the free agent type of thing for me. But Scott, I did like the platoon options and giving it something for first base as well, because honestly, I mean, you're trying to win. You're trying to build a winning ball club. So if you can add a professional at bat at any point in time, we always said before, like, maybe they can add two more bats onto that. Obviously, looking at the outfield more, but if you get a platoon option at first base and for not a ton of money, because that's kind of what Charrington is really tasked with, and you have a first baseman in Horowitz who you're going to be paying, what's quote unquote league minimum. You're paying him on a rookie deal, like less than $1 million, usually sitting around like 775,000. You bring in somebody else for a couple million, and you can build a great platoon for less than $3 million. I mean, that's a good use of the assets.
Absolutely. And isn't it terrible that that's what it comes down to week after week after week? I'm sure that there's Steelers podcasts or any number of NFL podcasts that don't have to talk about the money constantly and having to build a team on a budget. But that's the reality that we live in. And you and I said right from the beginning that, that we are realistic Pirates fans and we want to live in reality when we're talking about these things. They're not the most attractive superstar moves, but they're moves that we could realistically see the team, make and potentially be successful.
Yeah, because I mean, at this point in time, you either have options to be irate and frustrated, you have the option to be, I guess, overly optimistic, or you could kind of just stick right down the center lane and be realistic.